Chairman of the Slbc, who gave the welcome address, Shri P.P. Sengupta, MD and CEO of Indian Overseas Bank, ACS Finance, Mr. Muruganandam, Regional Director of the RBI, Shri S.M. Swami, CGM of NABARD, Shri Venkatakrishna, the convener, Mr. Sushil Chandra Mohanta of IOB, the government officers, bankers, friends, welcome. Thank you for attending yet another SLBC meeting on time and as scheduled. I'm normally one to talk about all the things we can improve and how much more we have to do. For a change, let me talk about some of the positives first and then briefly talk about where I think there's some room for improvement. First and foremost, I think the functioning of this committee, even in the 1 year or 15 months that I have been finance minister, has greatly improved. I think the predictability, the regular schedule, the depth of content, the availability of data, the timing of the data has all improved compared to where we started. Of course, there's a lot more room for improvement. I'll come back to that in a minute. But as of now, first let me compliment all the banks, all the members, and the convener, and all the officers of the SLBC for taking such proactive steps and also responding as requested by us over the months to get this done. I'm sure there's a lot we can do better, but I reiterate that compared to the first meeting I attended in, I think, May or June of 2021, I think these meetings have kept getting better and better. Of course, we're having this meeting in the midst of some global economic headwinds. I don't want to add much further than what the chairman and the RBI director have said. I'll just say that as somebody who has seen many of these cycles come and go, first as an academic, then as a consultant, and finally as a banker, I think we're in a very unique situation at a global level, because we're still living in some kind of abnormal regime. There's still trillions of excess liquidity pumped out by the banks, even relative to 2008, let alone relative to 2020. This combined fiscal and monetary stimulus, unprecedented at least since the 1920s Great Depression. We still don't know how this is going to end. Every time we think that we're returning to a new normal or back to something close to normal, then we see some aberrations again. Take the markets, for example. Oil has come down, stock markets are soaring. It's not clear to me what changed compared to 3 months ago. Inflation is still not contained. The job market, at least in advanced economies, is still very hot. But anyway, at some level, the risk perception seems to be much lower today, globally, in the markets, in commodities, in gold, in many liquid markets. I'm not sure that's sustainable, but I will say that it's only in crises that all correlations go to one. Under normal circumstances, though we are an increasingly globally linked economy, in fact, if you look back at the last, we'll say, 50 years, we almost used to be counter-cyclical. That is, when the US markets and the US economy did well, emerging markets did not, and vice versa. There was actually a flow of capital that went reverse. This negative correlation started slowing, then it became kind of neutral, then it became positive correlation as globalization increased. Perhaps as deglobalization is happening now, in the last certainly 5-8 years, and accelerating after COVID, people trying to bring back the supply chains into their control and at least diversify out of China and so forth. then I think we're starting to see a delinking of these economies as well. Of course, everybody's dependent on the dollar, and much of global trade still happens in the dollar. But after the Ukraine war, Russian assault on Ukraine, now that trade is also starting to change, with India leading the pack in terms of how much oil it buys non-dollar denominated. So I think there's a lot of interesting things, but the good news is that India will still have a decent year, most likely. The GST receipts, the government of India's total revenue receipts show a good trend. And I'm very happy to say that though we haven't publicly released the numbers, government of Tamil Nadu's receipts broadly are showing very positive trends. And as you would expect, that a state like Tamil Nadu outperforms the Indian average, then in all the dimensions, in terms of deficit reduction, in terms of revenue increase, in many dimensions, our performance is even better than what is published by the government of India. So part of that credit surely must go to all of you and the coordinated work that goes through the SLBCs and the district level banking committees. So I thank you for that. We're doing a good job. Of course, we can always do better. And I'd mainly focus on 3 or 4 areas, I think. One, we are now well aligned in terms of philosophy, in terms of strategy, in terms of big picture. But at the end of the day, it comes down to execution. And so the extent to which we can look at scheme by scheme, district by district, region by region, and find the soft spots, the weak spots, and find a way to either fix those or realize there are structural limitations that require something else, a different approach or a different balancing. I think that's when we get the next level of progress. Right now, we're doing the relatively easy things. When we hit a situation where we're not able to, achieve the targets persistently, then we need to ask the question, why does this bottleneck or roadblock exist? And start to look for solutions at that level. I strongly endorse and reinforce the Finance Secretary's, the ACS Finance's suggestions. And I give you a parallel. In the GST Council, every time we have to take something to 30, 32 ministers, including the Union Minister, it's very, very difficult to get any consensus. It's not even the consensus that worries me. It's very difficult to have a meaningful debate of any depth and granularity when there's that many people plus all their support staff and all that in a room. By contrast, I have been greatly impressed with the quality of the work that comes out of the subcommittees, what they call group of ministers. Once they assign group of ministers, 5, 4, 6, the quality of the work that comes out of that is much, much better, and it makes it much easier for the council as a whole to take those recommendations. I think it's very rare that we've had a group of ministers report that the majority has pushed back on, and one of those was when we asked for zero GST on COVID products, and the group of ministers came back saying something else, 5%. But even that, I think it was because of a lack of data. Had we used the GSTN data and had the kind of committee work properly, the GOM work properly, we wouldn't have had that problem, that issue at all, that conflict at all. So, of course, I would go the first in line to say that the GOMs are not working that great because the GST Council is not that sophisticated. We lose conveners of GOMs because of political changes or government changes, and then for months there's no replacement. The thing sits in limbo. So I'm not in any means saying that execution is great, but I completely endorse that subcommittees are much more likely to get the work done in a meaningful and practical way and bring it to the overall committee, SLBC, for approval in a more kind of formal way. I think the other area where we can do a lot of improvement is in the diversification of borrowers. Almost every single time I see the numbers and the performance, hitting the quantitative targets is a lot easier in terms of total borrowing, total outstanding, total lending, whichever way you look at it. But if you look at the number of individuals, every single time, that's where the weakness comes. I know it's harder to find new customers. I know the KYC rules are hard. I know that onboarding customers is a complicated and non-zero cost process. But especially when it comes to programs like the street vendor program, really that's where the success lies, right? Because we can see, at least in my constituency, I can see on the ground tens, if not hundreds of vendors still lining up stuff on the street in a blanket, reduced hygiene, dust, people trampling around. So these cards for the street vendors are really, really multifaceted benefit to society. And it's a bit disappointing to see those programs not get the right level of traction. At the end of the day, a 10,000 or a 20,000 rupee loan gone bad or gone NPA is a lot easier on one's conscience than the hundreds or thousands of crores that go bad with some borrowers. So I would urge you to keep looking to diversify the list of borrowers, increasing the number of borrowers in every scheme and overall in the statistics. I also think that we need to improve our technology application and therefore the results from these applications quite a bit. For example, in Tamil Nadu government, we realize there's a lot of overlap and redundancy and duplicity in the SHG memberships and the loans and so forth. So in the government itself, we have come up with a new methodology of enrolling the SHGs on a mobile app, also accessible other methods, but like a soft data where we can more easily validate these people exist, that they are actually performing one and only one kind of cross-referencing validations. I'm doing a pilot in my own constituency to see how we can clean up these assets, because the SHGs that work well are a boon. The problem is that many of them are riddled with bad data and I don't want to say malfeasance, but unintended outcomes. So both in the SHG data and membership, also broadly in the family and individual database. I think you may have heard multiple times, Government of Tamil Nadu has this data purity project where we're going through and creating databases that give us better picture of all of the different benefits individuals are getting and how these individuals fit into families, ensure that nobody gets left out who's eligible, also to prevent the kind of massive fraud that we saw in the jewel loan waiver program, where we started with an estimate of something like 18,000 something crores. And when the waiver was all said and done, it was 4,000 something crores was the actual eligible, after removing all the malfeasance and the duplication and the, look at the ratio, 18,000 something to 4,000 something. So I think technology will help a lot. But what we should do once we have that technology is, as the finance secretary said, we need to get reported to us with much greater granularity and much faster kind of time to report. That is, the data should be within 30 days or 40 days of the closing of the month, not 60 days like it is. Even the CAG finishes our books within 30 days of the closing of the month. So bankers like you should have more efficient data, 15, 20 days of the closing of the month. You should be able to update the month-end data. I think the only other thing I would say is that Mr. Swami, Sri Swami touched on some issues about bad debt recovery and all that. I had a really kind of aggravating experience of a government staff in my office whose house was possessed and went through, and there was all these allegations of insider dealing and all that stuff. Anyway, it's a messy business. We have asked for a report from the bank concerned, but I'm of the inclination that I might start sending internal instructions that when I find egregious cases like this, where I think it is a violation of the guidelines of debt recovery, that the government of Tamil Nadu will start, at least the finance department will instruct the government of Tamil Nadu departments not to do any banking with such banks in the future and to close all accounts and move them out. That's certainly within our discretion. And if not, we're happy to see how the courts litigate it. But, we have to start action somewhere. So this individual case is going to be a beginning for me. If I don't get a satisfactory explanation, then we're going to definitely take action. And we want to send the message that we are applying our minds and we know where the law is. Let me just conclude on a personal note by saying that, I spent many years as a banker, both as an investment banker and then a global commercial banker, many parts of the world. I didn't expect one day that I would be sitting as finance minister. I certainly didn't expect that. I didn't know that such a Slbc existed. But now that I'm here, I'm very happy and blessed and fortunate to have had the experience of sitting on the other side and of sitting in this side. I think the value that such coordination, if it is done all the way from the philosophical, strategic level down to the execution level in the branches, the values that such coordination can bring is infinite. As much as I say that I feel we've achieved a lot more than I feared when I came. I thought, we're coming with a pretty tricky situation. The economy is bad. The pandemic has hit us. The fiscal statistics of the state are bad. How can we really make a dent here? I've been kind of pleasantly surprised how far we've come. But the good news is that I can see 10 years worth of improvement still ahead, whether it's the government, whether it's the banking sector, or whether it's both of us working together. There's still so much headroom, so much more we can do, so much more value we can add to people's lives, to industry, to agriculture, to individuals. So, sometimes in the past I've been accused of being a bit of a dilettante, that every 2-3 years I change my job or I change my focus and I don't spend enough time on one thing. But here I can tell you, there's enough things to keep me interested here for the next 10 years. There's a lot of things we can do. And I hope that with every meeting, we will find that we are doing better and newer and more impactful things than we have in the past. So let me thank you all once again for the work over the last year plus, for the progress we've made, for your continued diligence and focus on improvements, on granularity, on diversification of borrowers, on better technology, and request your indulgence due to some other commitments. I won't be able to stay much longer, but it's very important to me that I attend every one of these meetings. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the opportunity and all the best.